In this video, we are going to talk about applications for percent. And a lot of times students get confused when you're talking about percent problems and they're not sure if they need to multiply or if they need to divide. So the publisher has come up with this circle method which will help you determine whether you need to multiply or divide. Now, in order to talk to you about the circle method, I first need to describe to you the different pieces of this circle. There's the base. And the base is the beginning or the whole quantity, which represents 100% of whatever it is that you're comparing your value to. And then there's the rate, which represents your percentage, and then the portion, the part of the whole. So when we look at the circle, the portion is going to be on the top. And we represent that with a P. The base is going to be in the lower left corner of the circle. And we use B to represent the base. And then the rate is going to be in the lower right part of the circle, and that's going to be represented by an R. Now, the way that this circle is going to help us determine whether or not we need to multiply or divide, we need to understand what these lines mean in the circle. This line right here is called the division line. And this line right here is called the multiplying line. And so if I know what the base and the rate is and I enter that in on the circle, then the base and the rate is being separated by the multiplication line, which means I need to multiply. If I know what the portion and the rate is and I'm trying to find the base, but I put in the portion and the rate on the circle, then I know that I need to take the portion divided by the rate because that's how it's separated on the circle. Okay, now the base, since the base represents the entire quantity or 100% of what you're comparing everything to, the base is always going to follow the word of. So in part A, 9,000 is going to be the base because you're taking it out of 9,000. That's what you're comparing everything to. And then, of course, the 60% is the rate, because your rate is always going to be your percentage. And then what? That's what we're looking for. So when I create my circle, remember P goes on the top, B goes on the bottom left, and R goes on the bottom right. So I'm going to put all the information into the circle. B is 9,000, so I'm going to put 9,000 in here. The rate is 60%. Now, when we do calculations with percentages, we need to make sure we put them in decimal form, which is why we practiced in the beginning of this section how to translate back and forth between percentages, decimals, and fractions. So when I put the rate in on the circle, I need to put it in decimal form, which is 0.60. And I'm trying to solve for the portion. 60% of 9,000 is what amount? That's the portion. So, because what's separating the two values that I know is the multiplication line, I know in order to figure out what the portion is, I need to multiply 9,000 times 0.60. So on the calculator, I'm going to put 9,000 times 0.60, and I'm going to get 5,400. So that means 5,400 is 60% of 9,000. Okay, the next example, it says 200 is what percent of 700? 700 is the base because that's what comes after the word of. That's what we're comparing everything to. The percent is what we're looking for. So by default, the 200 must be the portion. So by default, the 200 is the portion. Now when I put all of this in the circle, I put my portion at the top. My base goes on the lower left. And my rate is the percent, which is what I'm looking for. Now, because the two items that I know, which is the portion and the base, is being separated by the division line, I know I need to take 200 and divide by 700. Now, because this is a rate that we're solving for, when I take 200 divided by 700, that will give it to me in decimal values because we always work with percentages when we do our calculations in decimal form. So when I want to put it back into percent form, I have to make sure I multiply it by 100. So I'm going to take 200 divided by 700, and then I'm going to multiply by 100 to put it back into percent form. And if we say we round to the nearest hundredth percent, then I would have 28.57%. Okay, the next example, it says 55 is 40% of what number? So 40% is our rate. Of what number? That's my base because the base comes after the word of. And so this is my portion. So in this case, I'm looking for my base. So I'm going to put all that information into the circle. I know my portion is 55. I know my rate is 40%, but we use the decimal version. And I'm looking for my base. Because the two values that I know, the 55 and the 0.40, are being separated by the division line, I'm going to divide. So I take 55 divided by 0.40, and that will give me my base. Now, in this case, I don't need to multiply by 100 because I'm not solving for the rate. I only need to do that when I'm solving for the rate so I can put it back into percent form. So on my calculator, I'm doing 55 divided by 0.40. And I'm going to get 137.5. So that means 137.5 is the total amount. And when I take 55 out of 137.5, that would be 40%. Okay, it says Abby Burnett has yet to receive 60% of her lobster order. Abby received 80 lobsters to date. What was her original order? So, when we look at this, we know that 80 lobsters is part of her order. So that means that's the portion. Now, this one's tricky because we might want to initially say that the rate is 60%. But if you read the question carefully, it says the 60% represents the part of the order that she did not receive yet. The 80 lobsters is the part that she did receive. So when we put down the rate, that should be 40%. If she didn't receive 60%, then the part that she did receive, which is the 80 lobsters, is 40%. And the question is asking for the original order, which is the base. That's what we're looking for. So when I put this information in on my circle, the portion goes on the top. The rate goes in the lower right as a decimal, so that's 0.40, and we're looking for the base. Since the 80 and the 0.40 is being separated by the division line, that means I'm going to take 80 divided by 0.40 to find the entire order. So that would be 200 lobsters. So that means 80 lobsters out of the 200 that she ordered is 40%. Now, if I had made a mistake and I had multiplied 80 times 0.40 instead, and I got a number that was smaller than 80, you should be able to recognize that that wouldn't be the right answer. Because remember, 80 lobsters is the smaller quantity because that's just part of the entire order. So when you finish your problem, you want to make sure that it makes sense with the context of the problem. Okay, the last example says 5 out of 25 students in Professor Ford's class received an A. What percent of the class received an A? So the base is the entire amount. The 100%. That's our 25 students in the class. The portion is the 5, that's part of the class that received the A. And we're looking for the percentage, that's the rate. So I'm going to put all this information in the circle. The part goes on the top, the base goes in the lower left corner, and the rate is what we're looking for. So because what I know, which is the 5 and the 25, is being separated by the division line, I know I have to divide in order to find the rate. So I'm going to take 5 divided by 25. Now because this is a rate, when I work this out, I'm going to get the decimal value. But if I want the percentage value, I have to remember to multiply by 100 to change it to percent form. So multiply by 100, and when I do that, I get 20%. So that means 20% of Professor Ford's class is receiving an A.